This is August the 25th, 2008. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University Library, and we're conducting an oral history project called Oklahoma Centennial Farms. And we're here in Payne County with Robert Brixey
Yes.
on the Brixey Farm.
Yeah.
And Juliana Nykolaiszyn is also here, so she may chime in with a question too. So thank you for having us today.
Well, thank you for coming.
Okay, let's start by having you tell how your family came to have this piece of land.
This piece of land was purchased by my great-grandfather right after the run of 1889. He wasn't in the run, but right after the run, he came here from from a town named Brixey, Missouri, which was named after a great-great-grandfather that was general for the Union Army during the Civil War. Anyway, they came to Oklahoma after they opened up Indian Territory, and he bought this quarter section with a team of horses, and then he sold the property to my grandfather. Well, my great-grandfather's name was Barney Robert Brixey, and then my grandfather's name was Aaron Robert Brixey, who bought the farm, and then my father, Harvey Robert Brixey, bought it from his dad. And then I inherited the farm from my father. And that's the history of our farm.
And do you have a first name before you're Robert?
My name is Robert Leonard.
Not Leonard.
And then my son's name is Robert Dwight, and then his son's name is Justin Robert.
A lot of Roberts.
So we've got a lot of Roberts.
So your great-grandfather, when he moved here, did any of his siblings come?
Did he what? I'm sorry.
Did any of his siblings come when he came?
My great-grandfather, to my knowledge, no. I think he was the only Brixey that came.
And how many children did he have?
He had, oh gosh, two that I know of, but I'm sure there was many others. I should have my genealogy book
that's
here,
okay.
but
And the other two didn't choose to stay on the farm then?
the one did.
One did.
The one, Aaron Robert, he stayed on the farm.
Okay. And then how many children did he have?
He had 8.
And
That would have been my father's. And he had 8, 4 boys and 4 girls. And all 8 of them were raised here on the farm. 2 of them were born in Utah. There was a period of time where he moved to Utah, and 2 of them were born up there, but all the others were born right here on the farm.
and the other 7 just didn't want to live on it for their entire life then?
Well, it came time that my grandparents were going to retire, and they offered the farm to any of their children that wanted to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, my father was the only one that was living in the area that was active in the farming industry.
Okay.
And so he chose to buy it.
And then it comes to you, then how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have 2 sisters.
2 sisters. Okay. Are they in the area, or did they?
One of them is a graduate of OSU, and she's now a professor at the Laureate University in Los Angeles, or based out of Los Angeles. And the other one is deceased. In fact, this was her house right here, and she lived here for about 10 years. But she stayed in Oklahoma. Rosetta Mackey was her name.
Okay. Any other of the kids go to OSU?
My uncle, my dad's brother, went to OSU for 2 years before he was drafted into the Army, and then there was 2 other brothers that went into the Army, and during that period, that was during the war, that they were all maturing, and there was just that one brother, and then there's been several of my cousins that have gone to OSU. But to my knowledge, Marilyn, my sister, is the only one who graduated. She got her doctorate degree out of OSU.
Okay. Well, in the very beginning, what did the farm, or what was it? What was the produce, or did it do cattle or wheat or what?
The very beginning, it was cattle. They had all the domestic farm animals, chickens, sheep, ducks, the horses. Then they had raised the hay they had a lot of prairie hay meadows back on the east side, and they raised hay, cotton was very popular in the very beginning. And then once, and then wheat, and then once Dad got it, the farm had been pretty much, it had been depleted of the nutrients in the soil, and he put it in the soil conservation program to rebuild the soil. That was a government program. And pretty much it's been that way. I haven't really actively farmed it. I raised cattle on the farm, but as far as raising wheat and stuff like that, we really haven't. I've kept it involved with the soil conservation program.
And is there anything special about the farm you want to talk about first? Any uniqueness to it?
Oh, uniqueness. I'll take you down later and I'll show you the original log cabin. When you homesteaded a property, you had to build a house on it that was 12 by 12, being made out of logs or sod or wood, anything, but you had to live there for 5 years before the home became yours, or before the property became yours. And my grandfather built that log cabin. Well, as the families grew, his family and then my grandfather's family, they added on 2 rooms to it, and it became a 4-room log cabin, or a 4-room house. And then I didn't know, I was always told there was a log cabin in the center. And then once I got the house, the rooms were falling in. I was having problems getting insurance on the farm, and so I took the rooms off and was able to get the insurance. But there stood that old log cabin, and it still stands there today, as well as the original barn and the smokehouse and the old water wells down there. And then when my father got the farm, there was a big ravine down here, and I call it a gully, but anyway, they call it a ravine today, and he dammed it up. And because of all of the grass out here, and there was no runoff on the red soil, the water is clear. Well, immediately, now this was done back in the late 50s, and immediately the kids, my sister had all of her friends, and I had my friends, and we immediately started coming out here swimming because it was a clear swimming hole. And it became known as Brixey Lake. And he kept it open. He would charge people to come in and swim, and he kept it open until he died in 1988. At that time we closed it. But it's really, if you go back to people in that era, they all know where Brixey Lake is at.
I'll have to ask a few. Have you been swimming in it lately?
Yesterday.
Oh, cool. We'll get to see that then.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So the original farmhouse where you grew up, is it?
I didn't grow up because my grandparents, they didn't retire until the late 50s.
Okay.
So they stayed on the farm. And then we had already established a home over on the southeast side of Perkins. And we stayed there all the time. And then my parents later moved into a farm on the south edge of Perkins.
Okay.
And but no, and then I moved out here I moved to the farm in around 1990, and
going on 20.
stayed here until I moved to Texas a couple years ago on an investment down there.
So as a child, you would come and do holidays with grandparents?
Oh yeah,
Christmas and
spent all of my childhood days out here.
Favorite place in that house was probably the
living room. Yeah. Okay. The living room consisted of a wood-burning stove, some old rocking chairs, a piano, and a bed. And
so who played the piano?
No, I didn't. No, but we would sit around the old wood stove, and in the wintertime, and of course there was no electricity or running water.
When did that come? Do you remember? When did
that came probably, they made the house modern as far as electricity in around the mid-50s. It never had running water. They always carried the running water, nor did it have an indoor bathroom. And,
So is the privy still standing?
No,
No.
no, it's gone.
Shucks. You want to ask a question before?
But the house, it was it was 4 rooms that had in the original log cabin, that was the living room. And then they built on a kitchen, which it had a wood stove in it, and that's how they cooked. And then opposite of the kitchen, on the other side of the house, was Grandma and Grandpa's bedroom. All 4 girls lived stayed in the living room. That was their bedroom also. And then the 4 boys was the 1 room upstairs. And that's the way they lived.
8 under. Nowadays that would be really crowded, wouldn't it?
It sure would. But you kept warm.
Yeah, that's well, were there times when the farm didn't produce enough to make ends meet?
According to my aunt and uncle, there was some pretty rough times back during the Depression.
That's what I'm saying.
And they would live, their only source of income was the cream. They had a hand, they would have to milk the cows, and they had a hand separator, they call them, that would separate the milk from the cream, and they would sell the cream once a week, and they would also sell the eggs once a week, and that's what bought them their staples. And of course they didn't have any, there was very little money. There wasn't any money, and what clothes they had from my aunt and uncle, they would just pass them down from one generation. I mean, when they outgrew them, they went to the next child. Mm-hmm. They were probably very fortunate because they did have my grandfather's sister lived exactly about 1.5 miles straight east of here, of which I remember my father used to talk about how they would walk across the country and to Aunt Ora's and Uncle Harvey's place, and they didn't have any children, so they would go over there and they would work for 50 cents a day. So I'm sure that that 50 cents went to help support the family. And then I remember one of Dad's brother, Uncle Glenn, he told me that the only way they could get spending money was, of course, to work for Uncle Harvey or to go out and catch trap wild animals for the fur. And the fur industry was really big that would have been back in the 20s and 30s during the Depression. Mm-hmm. And that was their way of getting spending money. And I remember my aunt, she wrote in her paper, if extra money was needed, well, my grandfather would just rob piggy banks from the kids, and to come up with whatever money that was needed. And they didn't even have a car back then. My Aunt Ora Jane, she wrote, but they would take a horse and wagon to go visit their grandparents. And I guess it probably wasn't until the 30s or the late 20s that they actually got a Model T car to drive.
Well, how close was school for them then?
They actually went to Perkins. The school bus did come out here. They would have to walk up to the corner and catch the school bus, but the school bus did come out here to pick them up. Now my mother, she was raised a couple miles over west, and she went to IXL school, which is now Highway 33, and of which they just recently moved into the new Territorial Plaza there in Perkins.
That's where that building went, huh?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's over there.
I wondered.
And so they even looked at the log cabin David Saxler was thinking about moving it to the Territorial Plaza. But being that it's a 2-story log cabin, I don't think it would have held up to the move. So they chose to put a 1-story log cabin over there.
So once your father got it, he mainly did cattle?
He did cattle, and he kept it in the soil conservation program. He just mainly ran cattle on it, and then he would have, there's several meadows where he would cut the prairie hay once a year.
Did they have their own garden where they could be self-sustaining that way? If they
Oh yes, my grandparents always had a beautiful garden, and my aunt or Jane, she said that they always had to, the girls, that was their job, to work the garden and to put up the vegetables, and they had fruit trees and
Did they quilt?
oh yeah,
Any of those
there was
left?
quilting clubs and.
I wonder, any of those still left in the family then?
Oh yeah. In fact, a couple of years ago, I took there was a lot of quilt tops that were never made into quilts, and I took them and made all of my grandchildren quilts for Christmas.
That's good.
And,
So favorite meals would have been what, fried chicken or something?
well, probably not, because a favorite meal that would have been, you know, a luxury meal. I know even when I was raised, we very rarely did we have fried chicken, and if we had fried chicken, that was really a luxury meal because those chickens were used for the eggs, and we were raised on. If we had meat, it was usually a squirrel or a rabbit or something like that, and I remember we had potato soup almost every day, and you didn't.
Eat your vegetables and eat. Did they have family pets?
Dogs and cats, and I noticed my Uncle Bud, he said they had a pet raccoon, and the raccoon was, one time it got mad because they gave it, a raccoon will always wash its food, and he put in his note that they gave it some dried gravy, and when he put the gravy in the water, it melted and made the raccoon mad because he couldn't find his his food. And the raccoon would also steal all of anything that was shiny. And then they also, my Uncle Bud said during holidays and birthdays, they always had made homemade gifts. I guess nothing that you would go and buy. And the neighbors would come, and Thanksgiving they'd always have a harvest wreath made with corn. And at Christmas they'd cut a cedar tree from the farm and decorate it with homemade decorations, chains of colored paper strips, real apples, odd-shaped nuts.
Oh, cool.
In fact, if you want their information, you're welcome to keep it in your file.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did any of them get involved with 4-H or FFA?
Very much so. All of them they mentioned. Yeah.
And then the county extension workers, probably before you came in with some of the soil conservation, probably came in with some of those.
It didn't mention. They mentioned that they didn't recall any of the county extension people coming out. They were involved with FFA and 4-H.
So the land is originally 160 acres. You still have all 160.
We have. Actually, my sister took this 1 acre. Mm-hmm. My father gave us all an acre, which I never took, but my sister, she took this acre, and then my younger sister, she took an acre over on the other side of the farm, of which she has since sold it. And but other than that, it's all intact.
Did they expand get any more than that over the years? Or was it 160?
My father did. Yeah. My grandfather, he didn't, but my father, he had purchased. He probably had a total of about 5 quarter sections of land here in the community.
Sure.
So.
What's your favorite farm memory from your youth? Do you have that one memory that?
Oh, here on this farm, my favorite thing to do was I'd go down into the ravine, and where the spring was at, and make mud pies. The mud was real thick, and we'd go down there and play. It was always real cool because of the the spring down there, and everything was wet and damp.
Well, if they didn't have running water, how would you clean up then after that?
Well, you jump in
In the
the.
lake.
I'll show you. They had the spring dammed up, and you would jump in the water and clean up.
Did they have a cellar?
Yes, it was just an old dirt cellar, and that's
Canned goods and such?
uh-huh.
Well, when you mentioned a smokehouse, did they would smoke ham or what? Do you remember?
I'm sure they did. They probably smoked ham and beef to preserve it for the winter month, and
Was there a porch on the farmhouse?
I don't recall ever seeing a porch. And my aunt and uncle, they didn't write anything about a porch. In fact, one of them said there wasn't a porch. However, one of my other aunts said that she remembered a porch being there. So I don't know.
Okay. Siblings remember different things.
Yeah.
How about fences? How was the property marked?
By fence,
Boundaries.
by the fences. So they would make their own fence post, usually out of cedar or bodark wood, and which would had a long lifespan, and that's the way they marked the boundaries.
Would it be split rail back?
Pardon?
Split rail fences back in the
Yeah,
the old days,
Mhm.
older days. You know, sometimes you travel, you'll see the pile of rocks on the corners to mark
Mhm.
boundaries. I didn't know if they did that too here.
Now I know my Uncle Glenn, he used to talk about there was over on the east side of the property, he remembered as a kid a trail, where wagons would go through. There was a trail that went through the farm, before the run, and everything started being fenced off. And I thought that was interesting, and there was also a spring over there, so probably people would stop and water their horses over there at that spring. In fact, it's right in, I haven't looked it up on the map, but it'd be right in the area where, Washington Irving, the poet, he came through this area.
Oh, okay.
And I know there used to be a monument over here by IXL School on Highway 33. So I bet he went on that trail that came through this property.
I would think some good history.
Hmm.
Probably found a few arrowheads too over the years.
I've never found one over here. I have never found an arrowhead. I have on the other farm out in the southeast part of Perkins, but never here.
I figured with the water source you might have.
Yeah. But I know I remember some of my aunts and uncles having them, but I never did find any.
Well, be patient and be looking, huh?
Yeah,
Have to
right.
Be on the look for them.
Was it was the farm run just by the family, or did you employ any outside help through the years?
Oh no, there was never any outside help. Now my father once me and my sisters grew up, well then he did, but up until that time, it was all
You.
self-sufficient with the kid, my aunts and uncles.
Did they have to have supplemental income themselves? Did they take jobs off the farm?
Well, my Uncle Bud, he mentioned that my grandfather, he would do veterinarian type work, and which is probably how my father learned to do it, because he had all of my dad had all of the equipment to we call it cutting horses, to castrate a horse, and then I remember as a child myself going with Dad, and we would go around to the people in the neighborhood that needed a horse cut, and I would help him throw those horses and do that type of work. And of course, you couldn't charge for it; they just give him a donation. And I'm sure that Dad learned that from my grandfather, and I'm sure that's probably where he got the equipment to do that. And
They kind of help each other along the way too. Different farmers in the neighborhood, those who could do certain things, fill in.
so my grandfather, that would have been one other source that he would make a little bit of money. And they were also very active in the church. Lost Creek Church is a mile north, and they were very active in that. And that was probably their biggest social activity was the church life.
Probably going up to Stillwater would be the closest town, or Perkins.
Perkins would be your closest town. Even me as a kid, when I was a kid, going to Stillwater, would be a once a month trip, and you'd had everything right there in Perkins, movie theater, and your dry goods store, and there were several of those, and it was all right there in Perkins. And maybe once a month we'd go to Stillwater or go to Cushing.
Cushing's a little further, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
from here too. Did your grandmother have a favorite recipe, like her good at baking pies or homemade bread or anything in particular?
Oh, I remember Grandma. She would always make a lot of. She'd make her own breads, and she did that. Remember having a lot of bread. Remember having a lot of bad peanut butter, because the peanut butter would come in a box, a paper box, and it would always taste old. But she always had lots of bread and had lots of food, and of course she always had lots of vegetables, and it was all. Seemed like everything she cooked, all I remember is always cream peas and cream corn and cream potatoes and all that kind of stuff.
And well, if you didn't have chicken, did you get to have fried eggs very often, or were those for money making too, primarily?
Oh, we would have lots of eggs. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of old memories circle around food. That's why I ask, apple pies and such. And the chores were divided between the girls and the boys, or did they?
They were. I noticed that the girls did a lot. They were involved in the milking of the cows. The heavy work was done by the guys. My uncles, they would do they farm with horses, and they would have to do the farm work and building fence and cutting trees and stuff like that. But it was interesting to know that the girls were very much involved in the milking of the cows and separating the milk from the cream and that kind of stuff, all the cleanup.
And it was known as a farm as opposed to a ranch or a homestead, or they just called it the Brixey Farm?
They just call it the Brixey Farm. Now I call it the Brixey Homestead, but it was just always known as the Brixey Farm.
And once they got electricity, do you remember, if I think refrigerator, or was it something major like that you recall for the farm?
I remember it seemed like there was an old refrigerator that was electric.
Before that would have been an ice box?
Before that it was an ice box. Even me, when I was growing up, we didn't have, we did have a refrigerator that was natural gas. And we didn't have electricity, and we didn't have running water. The only thing we had was natural gas out there where we were raised, and so it was real common for me to visit my grandparents without the modern conveniences. In fact, I had my mother was raised by her grandfather, and which would be my great grandfather, and I used to go stay with him. In fact, I was the only grandchild that would stay with him, because all the other grandchildren, they were, I guess, they didn't stay with him because they had the modern conveniences and didn't want to stay out there because there was no electricity or no indoor bathroom or running water, and that was just normal for me. But I'd always make sure I didn't stay there on Saturday night, because Grandma that was the night that you would take a bath, and you would be scrubbed down with lye soap, and
Really?
if you've ever had a bath with live soap, you'll never have another one because it burns. And I know my aunt and uncle, they both wrote about how they would, on Saturday night, they would take a bath in the kitchen in a galvanized tin tub, and all 8 of them used the same bath water. And
Did they get to pick which order they got to go?
I don't know. I wondered that too.
Volunteer to go first and get it over with and clean.
Yeah.
So Sundays were special then if they cleaned up on Saturday nights then?
Oh yeah, you always had to clean up on Saturday nights and Sundays. Go to Sunday school and church, and then you have your big meal on Sunday.
And then what? After your big meal, what did
Just
you get to play around?
Visit with family and relatives and play. And
Was there a tire swing? Did they have a tire swing?
oh yeah, we had swings and we had teeter-totters and stuff like that.
And bicycles?
Bicycles, yeah, there was bicycles. And lots of marbles. You played marbles a lot.
Okay. Jack?
In fact, when I was cleaning up down there, I found marbles under the house and stuff like that.
Well, like for where the closest friends would be, if you was 160 acres here, you had to go quite a ways to even have friends over, or
Well, you would have, back then, you would have a farmhouse on each quarter section. And Herschel Cross, as mentioned in my uncle's notes, that he lived on the next quarter south. So they could go to his house, or they could go over to the Cundiffs, which they had lots of children. And so on every quarter section, there would be a farmhouse with family. So you really weren't that far from friends. Now, today, it's not feasible or possible to make a living off of a quarter section of land. So these people have sold off their farm. And, I mean, a lot of the people living out here now they live out here in the country, but they're working in town. Mm-hmm. But you go, for example, you go over to where I was raised, 5 miles out of Perkins on southeast part of town. There's not a lot of people or development going on. So there's very few people. I mean, you may be 2 or 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, because if you're going to be a farmer, you've got to have lots of land. Mm-hmm. And so it's impossible to make a living on a quarter section of land. In fact, my great-grandfather, who lived a couple miles over, Ed Jackson was his name, and he only had 80 acres. And he raised the same amount of children on 80 acres. And, plus adopting my mother and my aunt, Mercedes Barta. And, but it's amazing how they did raise people on such little, how little it took to get by.
And a lot of relatives close by, sounds like.
I'm sorry?
A lot of relatives close by, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean,
yeah.
all around.
Yeah, there's a lot of us, Funny to come up here because, still today, I've got cousins every place. You could go drive around the corner and you'll find cousins.
Well, what do you envision happening for the next 100 years for this section of land?
I don't have any plans for it. I don't have any plans to sell it. You never can tell, Stillwater is really growing, as well as Perkins, and someone may come along with an offer that I can't refuse to take. If I don't need to sell it, so I'm in, no hardship there. I would love to see it passed on to my son, and then ultimately to my grandson, and keep it in the family. Yeah.
Did they have any inclination to keep
Robert, my son, he really enjoys the farm. Yeah, he enjoys it. He has a good job, and he enjoys coming up here and going swimming.
Well, it may not be income producing, just a place to retreat to, maybe.
Right. Yeah. I see them, having a retreat up here. I don't see them moving up here, but who knows? Maybe when they retire, they'll move up here. And he also has land up over by Perkins. That was my parents left land to all of their grandkids when they died, and so he has some land up here.
Did they have a storm shelter or did they worry about tornadoes back then?
I've never been in one. All my life living right here in Oklahoma, I have never been into a storm shelter. When the storms came, Mom always said, well, if it's time to go, it's time to go. And we did have a cellar, and I guess if we saw a tornado coming, we'd go get into it. But in all my days up here, I have never been into a cellar for the storm. Yeah, right. But
Any questions?
You mentioned earlier in the interview the work you did with the log cabin. Have you done any other restoration work on the farm since you've been in possession of it?
well, the smokehouse was just leaning, and we stood it back up as much as we could, and to secure it. Um, but other than just maintaining the grass and stuff, no.
So how early did you learn how to hunt?
Well, I wasn't a hunter. Now my father was. I didn't get into that. I would go with him, but I just never did enjoy going out and killing animals. And I don't know why, but I just didn't do that. But my father and his brothers, they were all big hunters.
Probably got BB guns early.
Oh yeah, we had BB guns. Yeah, yeah. In fact, my Uncle Bud mentioned that he got his BB gun stolen because no, not stolen, taken away by my grandmother because he was aiming through the crack of the wood in the smokehouse and hit it, but not knowing that his sister Bonifay was inside and she got hit in the rear. So Grandma took his BB gun away from him, and he was the youngest of all of the children.
So what are their other names?
Well, there's the girls is Bonifay, and then there's Ruth, there's Florence, and Ora Jane. And Ora Jane is the only one that is living today of the girls, and she was all of them graduate. They all went to school in Perkins, and most of them did graduate. In fact, Ora Jane mentioned that she was valedictorian of her class in Perkins, and she was a very interesting lady. She went on to nursing school and became a missionary and served 2 terms of, I think there was 5 years each, in Ethiopia. And then she, due to some health problems from the water in Africa, she had to stop her going over to doing her mission work. And then she became, she did a lot of midwife work across the United States, and she resides over in Harrah, Oklahoma. And then there was the 4 brothers, is Barney and Glenn and Bud and my father Harvey, of which Barney and Bud are still alive today.
They'd be in their 80s, 90s?
Oh yeah, they'd be in their 80s, yeah, or near 80, yeah.
And
then my father, he died at a young age. He died in 88 at the age of 67. So he was, I thought, to me, that was very young. Yeah.
So are the brothers in the area then, or are they out of
my Bud, he is up in Hooker, Oklahoma. He moved to Hooker and farmed all of his life up there. And then Barney, he and Glenn, they moved to Salt Lake City after World War II and married and raised their family in Salt Lake City, Utah. Yeah.
So you spent some time then, or your parents spent some time in Utah as well?
No, my parents didn't. Now, when my dad was, I don't know if he was born before they went to Utah or afterwards, but he was born in the house I'm going to show you later. But
well, from Oklahoma to Utah, what was the pull to Utah connection?
They had I think it was kind of like a land run up there where you could homestead some property, which my grandfather did, and that land was later bought by some of my other uncles, and they it's called Summit Point, and they go up there every summer, in fact, Bud went up there this summer, and I don't know who joined it, but they go up there and stay. But my grandparents only stayed up there a couple of years, and 2 of their children were born there, and then they came back to Oklahoma. I guess it was just maybe too cold or hard to make a living up there.
Or maybe closer to Brixey, or their hometown.
Yeah, maybe so.
I've been there. We're doing good, huh? Is there anything I haven't asked that you want to say? Talk about. Any family lore, whether we know if it's real or not? Do you any favorite family stories that's been passed down from generation to generation?
Oh golly.
Any fish that got away stories, that type of thing?
Family stories, that's a hard one.
That's a hard one, it is. Home remedies?
Oh, that's a good one. My aunt, being that she was a missionary and a nurse, she said the home remedies was, I can't believe it, for sore throat, take kerosene and honey. Kerosene and honey. Now, I've heard of whiskey and honey, but that's the first time I've ever heard of kerosene and honey. And I know my grandparents would never ever have allowed whiskey in the house, so maybe that worked. And soda, you'd make a soda mixture for, probably out of baking soda and water for poison ivy, and iodine for cuts, and castor oil for stomach aches. And I remember even as a kid, my sister and I, we wouldn't dare tell Mom and Dad that we had a stomach ache, because we knew we were going to get a full tablespoon of castor oil. Have you ever had that?
I have. It's awful. I've had the whiskey and honey too, and it's not too good either when you're little.
Yeah, no, my great grandparents, they used to give me that. My other grandparents, but kerosene and honey, I can't imagine.
I can't either. Wonder what percentage. Just a little bit of kerosene with a lot of honey, or things like that would burn too. You wouldn't know which was. It was your throat.
I don't know. I can see whiskey and honey because taking it as a kid, the whiskey would make you sleep, and
sure.
And the honey would probably be soothing for the sore throat. Yeah. I remember my father used to, when we had a sore throat, he would swab our throats with iodine, and then I know it said that they never went to the doctor. However, they did say that my grandmother, she did go to the doctor with double pneumonia. She went to the hospital with it. Fortunately, she didn't kill her or anything. But
I wonder how they pulled teeth in those days then for kids, the little, baby teeth. Any tricks to those?
Oh, my dad, he used to just get a pair of pliers and pull them out, with our baby teeth. Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered a lot.
I know my grandmother here, she was a Hall, and it's interesting to go to the cemetery. I was trying to find out why there was 3 sisters that all died within the same week, and they were very young, and I couldn't find that out from any of my aunts or uncles, but later reading the news, they died in the 1918, and that's when they had the what do you call it, pandemic, where you have a lot of an epidemic of flu, and there was hundreds of thousands of people that died during that period from the flu.
And those 3 sisters did.
And my grandmother's, she lost 3 sisters during that period to that.
Is there a family plot then, since you mentioned cemetery, where they were all buried?
There is, yes, and it's really interesting. You go over there and I had my great grandfather and my grandfather and my grandmother, and then and her parents, and they're all buried over at Elm Grove, and then On my mother's side, all of um, her mother, she lost her mother when she was only like 5 or 6 years old, and she's buried over there, and my great grandparents, and they're all buried over at Elm Grove Cemetery, you know.
In Perkins.
Yeah, Elm Grove is a couple of miles west of Lost Creek Church.
Okay. We may have to venture there too on our way.
Hmm. And then my parents, they're buried over. They would have been buried there, however, they bought it's the place right there on the south city limits of Perkins, and that was originally homesteaded by, oh, I can't think of his name. I should know it, but he was the one who developed the town of Perkins, and then he had that ranch, that quarter section there that he homesteaded, and he took 1 acre out of his farm that was right across from the Perkins Cemetery, and if you couldn't afford to buy a lot, then you could be buried there free. I mean, as far as you didn't have to buy a lot. And then before my dad died, he made it known that if he ever died, he wanted to be buried on his farm. So that's where they're buried, right there on his farm.
They're allowed to do that?
Well, they are now, because Perkins Cemetery, that I remember when Dad bought the farm, that cemetery, it wasn't kept up because nobody, it was just private land. And people, although they were buried there, nobody kept it up, and it was just all brush and briars, and every now and then you'd see a headstone. Well, Knight was the man's name that originally owned that farm, that developed Perkins. But then Perkins took in that cemetery and cleaned it all up, and it's just a little tiny cemetery right across the road from the main cemetery in Perkins.
We'll have to go do that too.
Yeah, it's really neat. And nobody's been buried there since Perkins took that in. They probably did that 20 years ago. Everybody likes to be buried, I guess, over with the people with money on the other side, but just my relatives have been buried there, you know. But no, had a couple of an uncle and a cousin and my sister and my parents.
Let's go back a little bit. How did your parents meet then? Were they in high school together?
In high school, yeah, in school, yeah.
And they didn't venture too far from their home places either then?
They stayed right here all their life. Mm-hmm. And when they got married, they of course there wasn't any money. That was back. They got married in that would be 1941, and just getting over the Depression. And they lived in my great grandfather's chicken house. It was either a chicken house or a smokehouse. It was a combination, and they just cleaned it out, and that's where they started. And then they continued their farming operation, and then we got an oil well. That oil well made all the difference in the world, just that one little oil well. And then Dad just continued to buy land and property. And
first tractor?
He had lots of tractors. He had big tractors. Even I would spend my summers in the late 50s. We would go to the wheat harvest, and after our harvest here in Oklahoma, we would load up the combine on the truck, and we would head north, and we would custom combine wheat all the way up to, we would end in Nebraska, and then by that time it would be in the 1st of August, and we'd head back to Oklahoma, get ready for school. And we did that about 3 years in a row. Prior to that, I know when I was a very young kid, 2 or 3 years of age, when they first came out with the first self-propelled combine. In fact, it was featured in the Perkins Journal just a couple of weeks ago. they wrote up an article that Grover Rains, then Perkins, my cousin, and my folk cousin, Grover and Dad, they would go on. They took the first self-propelled combine and went to wheat harvest, and they did it a couple of years in a row.
And that paid pretty well, or?
It was good money, yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, it was good money.
And do you have a round hay baler or a square hay baler when you bale your hay? When you cut your hay, do you have the round or the square?
Well, in those days, back then you had the square.
Yeah.
And you'd put it up in barn. And today, they put them round bales because you don't have to put them up in the barn. And but I hauled lots of hay in my days, a lot of hay. Something I never want to do again. And I shoveled a lot of wheat.
Shovel it into a truck or something, or
you shovel it off the truck into the barn, or the bin to hold the wheat and the storage. And
is that building still here on the farm too then, where you store the wheat?
Well, the dad used it, some of it. We would put a little bit of the wheat in what was the old smokehouse.
Okay.
And it would hold enough wheat just for, and I remember Grandpa doing the same. He would store, you'd keep back a little wheat for your seed wheat for the coming year. And I was reading my Aunt Ora Jane's notes, and she said that for breakfast they would have the homegrown wheat. And I don't know what they did with that. I remember one time they soaked wheat in water and we would eat it, but I guess it was like cracked wheat. And but she said that's what they ate for breakfast every day.
Early cereal, I guess then.
Yeah.
I wonder what they did for sugar.
Well, they would buy their sugar. That would be one of the staples that they would buy.
From the
Yeah.
mercantile or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, you'd think you'd make a whole lot of bread then if you had your own wheat.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I remember when, just to get store-bought bread, that was great. I remember just learning to dislike homemade bread. And to love that store-bought bread and store-bought milk.
Sure. Ice cream?
We'd make ice cream by,
Your head.
that was always a family deal. You'd take turns churning the ice cream, churn and use the fresh milk, and that was always a fun Sunday afternoon deal.
Sure. In the wintertime, anything special about how you handled the cold weather here?
I remember the winters being very cold. Of course, our house, there was no insulation. And when we were tearing down this old house, their insulation, they used cottonseed hulls between the walls to insulate the home. And our home that we were raised in, there was no insulation, and our only source of heat was the fireplace. And my sister and I, we would go to bed we would take bricks and these old heavy irons, and we'd put them in the fireplace and get them red hot, and then we'd wrap them in towels, and we'd go upstairs and sleep in the same bed, and cuddle up to those hot bricks and hot iron just to keep warm. Mm-hmm. And I remember it always being very cold. And then, all my grandparents, nobody, that was their only source of heat. We didn't have a pot-bellied stove. We just had that old fireplace. But my grandparents, they always had the hot pot-bellied stove to keep warm by.
Cut your own trees and...
Oh, yeah, you cut your own trees, and you'd saw up prior to winter, you'd saw up a big pile of wood, and you'd burn that all winter.
Those were the days before roasted marshmallows, huh?
Oh, yeah, we'd do that too. Yeah. And then we'd have to get up every morning and, I don't know how many cows. I used to have to milk, 3 or 4 cows every morning before you go to school.
Before the sun came up?
Yeah, before the sun came up, and you'd milk all those cows and then go in and clean up and eat breakfast and then catch the bus and ride the bus forever to to get to school. And this morning I took one of the guys' grandkids to school, and I thought, man, this is a lot of work. I have to get up this early just to take somebody to school. And now thinking back, how don't tell them what time I got up.
Probably 4 or 5.
Yeah, and then you'd come home from school and you'd have to go do the same thing over again. You know, milk the cows and slop the pigs. And
How many cows did you have then? Can you?
If
you milked 4, how many?
Oh, I remember. We would probably milk about 15 cows a day. You know, morning and night, because my sister, she'd have to milk, and then Dad, he would milk, and we'd probably milk about anywhere from 12 to 15 head.
So when was the last time you milked one then?
The last time I milked one, I was probably 12 years old. About the time the oil well came. I think we got to quit milking cows.
Didn't have to do it through high school then?
No, didn't. No, not through high school.
Well, were you in 4-H yourself in high
I
school?
was very active in FFA. And we were involved in 4-H, during grade school years. And we were involved in. We would always have stuff that we would enter into the county fair in Stillwater. And I remember I noticed in my notes from my aunt and uncle that they said they did the same thing as kids. Enter their stuff in the county fair. And that was always good money too.
If you won.
Yeah, if you won.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff by meaning cattle or animals or other types.
Oh, we'd put cattle in. We'd put your corn, your watermelons, your mom would bake stuff and pies and cakes, and you'd put your any of your canned good that you canned, and we would put everything we could get our hands on. Hopefully win a ribbon and get some money.
Well, would you go and stay for the entire thing, or would you come back and forth at night?
We'd come back and forth, yeah. Yeah. And then if you won, you'd take it to the state fair. We never got to state fair, though.
County fair's good, too. They're fun. And the carnival come through some?
The what?
Carnivals? Did carnivals come? Traveling carnivals?
We had carnivals for the county fair. And I can remember we used to have circuses that would come to Stillwater. And we never had carnivals in Perkins, but I remember when I was a kid, they would have a circus that could come to Stillwater.
Where would it be?
They had it out there in a big pasture out there by on the other side of where the Harley Davidson is at. Mm-hmm. On the opposite side of the road. Okay. Out there was a big pasture, and that's where they would have it.
Including rides like Ferris wheels and things, or?
Not at the circus. They didn't have.
I'm thinking carnivals.
But at the carnivals they did.
Yes.
Carnival was always lots of fun. That was always, we always enjoyed going to that. And then my great grandfather, it was a big deal to watch the horse pull. He always had to go to horse pull because they'd have these big horses that would pull weights.
You mentioned that your family got an oil well.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that, how that came about, and how you found the right spot and all that.
Well, that would have been in 1956.
A long time ago.
That they drilled the first oil well, and I remember it was really exciting because Dad said if we got oil, we could have anything we wanted. And us kids, he told my sister and I that we could have anything we wanted. So I chose to have a racer bike. By that time, I was too fat and heavy that I blew the tires out on it. But I got my racer bike, and my sister got a record player. But that changed our life because there was suddenly money coming in. And it wasn't much because the oil wasn't much then. Mm-hmm. And then they drilled another well, and they got oil on it. And today that second well is still pumping. And we still get a little check, but
What prompted them to even think about drilling?
Well, they leased the land, to an oil company for an oil company wanted to lease the land, the mineral rights, and so you have, I think they leased it for a couple of years, and they have to either drill or give it up after 2 years. And they drilled and got it. They had, at that time, they had drilled several wells out there in that area and near the farm, and
They came and knocked and said, "Can we?"
so it really helped us out. I remember we got a new car in 1956. We got a '56 Ford, and took a vacation, went all the way up to the state of Washington and back, and we were gone for 15 days on the road all the time, and with as many relatives as we had, we only had to spend one night in a motel for the whole duration of the trip.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Couldn't do that these days either. Did you name the drill? Did you name it the well? Like a lot of people
No,
name it something.
No, couldn't. Now my aunt and uncle, they drilled the Bartas. They drilled a well they live right south of town, and my mother's sister. And they drilled their own well right in their front yard. And I was darned if they didn't hit it. It's called Barta Oil Company. And it's still pumping.
They need to watch.
Now they drilled on this farm once, but it was a dry hole. They didn't hit oil.
Have to go a little deeper.
I guess. I don't know. But my dad, he always believed in keeping the royalty. He would buy farms and then resell the farm and not let the mineral rights go, just to keep the mineral rights. And so
and do you have those then for these
Yes, ma'am.
these farms?
Yeah, my sisters and I, or my sister. We only have one now.
So the first car was a 50.
Actually, our first car was we bought a used 1950 Ford, little sedan, and then we bought the new car, which was a 56 Ford, and that's the one we took all the way to Washington.
Yeah. What color?
Pardon?
What color?
It was green. It was green. And then we got a 57 with the big fins on it. And it was that orange and white. And then we got a 59 Chevrolet station wagon.
Every 2 years then?
We took it to Miami Beach to the OU football game, which was in 1959.
Stay with relatives in that direction too?
We didn't have relatives. None of them went to the south. They were all went to the west, but none to the east or south.
So you were OU fans early on then?
No. We went to the game because it was an excuse to go to Miami, and Dad went to the game actually, and we were always OSU fans. Yeah, we would never. Dad would never miss an OSU football game, and I always enjoyed going with him. But yeah, we were OSU fans.
Well, they didn't play on campus then, did they? They had to go to Taft. Was it Taft? In this Oklahoma City where they played a lot of their games, OSU, in the 50s. Is that right? Am I remembering right?
There were a few games that were moved to Taft, but they did play some games on campus.
I don't remember that. No.
Campus has changed a lot since the 50s then.
Yeah.
I remember where they
I know Dad, he helped build the student union building there on campus. And then one of my cousins, one of the Bartas, she works for this. She's an economist for OSU. She's at Barta, and she works up there full time. And she has. I always enjoy reading her article. She has an article every week in the Perkins Journal.
You still have connections all around then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anything else? No? Anything else you want to add before we cut off and get the grand tour?
Oh, I can't think of a thing. You covered everything. Yeah, let's drive down and I'll show you where
The original cabin was?
the old homestead was,
Good. All right.
or is.
Well, let's sign off on this then. Thank you for inviting us today.
Well, thank you
It's
for coming
been a
out.
pleasure.
It's been an honor.